Greetings, loved ones. Abuse always leaves deep scars, and they're sometimes impossible to erase. The psychological effects of domestic violence and domestic abuse tend to be profound, especially if the harm comes from someone you're in love with. Today, we're going to discuss the psychological effects of domestic violence. Our goal here is to get the messages out of how to recognize violence and leave, or how to recognize someone who is suffering and help intervene in their situation. So please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single episode. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit that like button, and please share these messages with others because you never know. By doing so, you could save a life. We need to establish the difference between psychic damage and psychological abuse. Psychic damage is the result of a violent act. It consists of the sensations and emotions experienced immediately after being abused. Psychological effects, however, are imprints left in your mind when psychic damage hasn't been properly treated. Now, I have a quote here from Walter Riso, and it says, "In any romantic relationship, if they don't love you, they don't deserve you. And even less so if they hurt you. If someone hurts you repeatedly without meaning to, then perhaps they do deserve you, but they are no good for you." Walter Riso said that. Not sure who he is, but he's somebody. It's a really interesting quote. Domestic abuse and abuse that takes place within a family are two types of violence that have the greatest impact. There's a deep emotional bond, and the abuse tends to happen over a long period of time. The worst part is that the abuse is often subtle or condoned by the environment or culture, and therefore it isn't seen as a problem, and that's why it goes on for decades. Domestic abuse can manifest in many different ways. One of the most brutal and painful is the kind that involves physical violence. However, there are many types of abusive behaviors that are almost invisible to outsiders, and it's important we share this with you so that you can recognize it either in your situation or in somebody you know, so that we can work together to end the violence. So domestic abuse can look like mockery and ridicule of the beliefs, appearance, or opinions of the abused individual. For example, "Oh, you're stupid to want to go to church. There's no God." Or, "Why do you want to vote Republican? They're idiots." I'm not saying my opinions. I'm just giving examples of what, "Oh, you want to start your own business? You're too stupid to do that." So this is mockery and ridicule. Also, constantly pointing out mistakes and saying that the abused individual can't do anything right. I understand that one. My identity was destroyed by a family member growing up. Nothing was ever good enough. Nothing ever is good enough now, but those toxic people have no place in my life. Should be the same for you. Another indicator is manipulation to make them feel guilty. The abuser will blame them for not meeting their expectations and then punishes them with silence, anger, or violence. For example, "Oh, you can't cook for anything. Look at this food is cold. Why don't you have this food? The house is a mess. You failed as a woman," or "I hit you because you made me do it." There's denial of the abuse too. If the victim tries to talk about it, the aggressor refuses and doesn't admit to their harmful actions. And I had a huge experience with this with one of the toxic people in my life, that I sat down to try to reestablish the relationship and talk about what had happened, and they denied absolutely everything. It didn't matter that there were people who had witnessed this violence and confirmed that this psychological abuse occurred, or psychological terrorism, as I like to call it. They denied it all. It didn't happen. Didn't matter. My husband, my cousin, friends, other family members who witnessed it, they're all liars because it did not happen. And that's also a sign of a narcissist. Also, indicator is isolation from friends and family. And this includes jealousy and criticisms of friend and family. For example, they will say, "Oh, your mother doesn't love you. She's messed up her own life. She's going to influence you in a bad way. Or you don't need to be around her. You don't need to be with that friend. She's always running around with men." or just jealousy. Who are you talking to? You know, that man that you talk to, who, checking your phone, and who are you talking to? Who's this? These are all things that are indicators of violence. And the common factor in all of these behaviors is a desire for control. It's all about power and control. The abuser always attempts to impose themselves forcefully or subtly on the other person. They don't need to yell or insult the other person for it to be domestic abuse. And so people will say, well, he hasn't hit me, you know, he doesn't yell at me. There are other forms of abuse that occur for a long period of time before the first time that there's physical abuse. And we need to understand these indicators so that we can help the person understand that, yes, they are suffering domestic violence and should leave. Domestic abuse always has psychological consequences. It leaves marks on the victim's body, mind, and social life. And although each case is unique and everyone reacts differently, the consequences are more or less the same. So let's talk about some of the main effects of domestic abuse. Psychological consequences, we'll start with that. Mainly damage to one's self-esteem. In fact, people with little self-love have a greater chance of falling into the hands of abuser. Guilt and hopelessness are common, as well as anxiety and depression. So, as I said, I grew up with somebody who was doing psychological abuse and destroyed my identity. And I had failed after failed after failed relationship. I fell into abusive relationships. I suffered domestic violence. When you don't believe that anyone is going to love you, it makes you a mark. And those predators, they can sniff it out pretty easily. Physical consequences: sleeping problems, digestive issues, headaches, hypertension, and respiratory issues. Social consequences: in most cases, the victim isolates themselves. They will either, because the aggressor is saying things to them, they'll then begin to withdraw from the others to keep them from being angry. For example, I had my boyfriend's brother and sister over for dinner, and my boyfriend was supposed to be there, but he went to the bar, he got drunk, he came in as we were on dessert, threw a fit, threw his family out, and I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. Or he'd make a fit if I was on the phone with my mother when he came home. So, you know, people stop seeing their friends and family. They're feeling unworthy, they're feeling ashamed. They're also trying not to upset their partner, who almost always is suspicious at social gatherings. It's important to point out that the situation tends to be a bit more complicated for abused men. Society has this chauvinistic mentality, we call it here machismo, and it's frowned upon for a man to allow his partner to mistreat him. What kind of man are you that your woman beats you? And so men often hide their abuse and even refuse to admit it to themselves. And this makes them slightly more likely to develop health issues and addictions as a result of their hidden pain. So, what should we do? Domestic abuse causes a lot of confusion, especially in the beginning. It's common to have a lot of contradicting feelings and attitudes and thoughts. You simultaneously love and hate your partner. You feel irritated, but at the same time, you justify their behavior. Oh, well, he was angry at me because I didn't have supper ready when he got home, or, you know, I was out too late, or whatever. The victim in their mind begins to believe that they're the cause of the abuse, and they start walking on eggshells and changing behaviors. So it's never easy to face the fact that the person you love is also the source of such a serious problem. It's hard to admit that maybe the only way out is to leave them. They promise they're going to do better, and then you go back, and then they do it again. On average, a woman leaves an abusive relationship 7 times before she leaves it for good. And this is part of the perverse dynamic of domestic abuse. The hardest part about getting out of this type of situation, which is always dangerous, is taking the first step. The first step is admitting and accepting that you're in an abusive relationship. Once you've accepted it, the next step is to face the fact it's not going away on its own, and your abuser will not change. They do not change. Any promise to change is a lie. Therefore, You need to ask for help. If you are a victim of violence, I want you to listen to me right now. I want you to know this. You are valued. You are loved. You are intelligent. You're beautiful. And God does not want you to suffer violence. He wants you to live free from violence in peace and tranquility. And there is a way out. It's not your fault. And abuse is not love. Somebody who on one hand abuses you and on the other hand says they love you is a liar. If you are a victim of violence, please reach out to somebody. Keep reaching out until somebody can help you. And if you're in a dangerous situation, call 911 for help and get out immediately. For those of you who are not suffering violence, you will encounter someone who is. 1 in 3 women worldwide suffer partner violence. The question is not if you will encounter someone who is suffering. The question before God is, what will you do when you do encounter them? You could be a person who saves a life. We are all destined to be champions for justice. And those who suffer violence need to know that those who love them and those who don't even know them will step out and reach out to them to give them the courage and the help they need to leave before it's too late, before they are killed. 1 in 3 murders of women is at the hands of their partner. This series is dedicated in honor of Gabby Petito, a young, bright, beautiful woman whom the world has lost because of gender violence. Please go check out the foundation her family has created for her at gabbypetitofoundation.org. My husband and I, we support this foundation and help get these messages out. The only purpose of these programs is so people can learn to identify violence in their situation and learn that they can leave, and for people who are not suffering violence to be able to recognize someone around them who is suffering and know how to intervene. So subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single episode. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit that like button and share these messages with others in Facebook Messenger and Twitter and Instagram, on your Facebook page. Please share these messages because you never know. Just by doing so, you could save a life. Next week, we're going to talk more about the effects of domestic violence and its invisible scars. Until then, God bless you.